The desert sun beat down mercilessly on Dry Creek, turning every wooden plank, every cracked street into a harsh yellow glare that seemed to burn the eyes. Dust swirled in lazy spirals around the feet of a girl bound in chains, her wrists black and bruised, her skin raw from rope burns. The faint metallic clink of iron echoed against the splintered auction block with each minute movement, as though mocking her helplessness. She stood there, body limp like a broken doll, eyes wide and glimmering with silent terror, every breath a shallow rasp against the hot wind. The wind moved through the town's wooden slats, carrying the acrid scent of distant fires, the bitter tang of sweat, and the coppery odor of fear. A hawk circled above, its sharp cry cutting through the drone of the jeering crowd. Men spat in the dust, laughter jagged and harsh, snapping like dry branches underfoot. Their eyes were hungry, their voices like a pack of scavenging coyotes. "Who will take the girl for 20? The auctioneer's hammer fell again, a loud, painful punctuation, driving her heartbeat faster, a frantic drum within her chest. Each strike echoed through the dusty square, a cruel metronome counting down her freedom. The crowd leaned forward, eyes glinting with amusement at her humiliation. Every glance, every leer, felt like a lash across her soul. From the shadows, a figure observed, hat pulled low, face shadowed, but marked with grief, etched deep by decades of solitude. The rancher's eyes, sharp and weary, lingered on her with an intensity that made the laughter around him seem small and hollow. His hands, calloused and scarred, clenched against his thighs as if the wind might steal his resolve. He remembered loss, injustice, nights spent with nothing but the whispering wind to keep him company. His gaze did not waver. A horse tethered to a post pawed nervously at the ground, sending tiny clouds of dust into the air. Somewhere near the corral, smoke drifted from a fire, mingling with the metallic tang of blood from a stray cut on a horse's flank. The girl's lips quivered. She tried to scream, but only a dry rasp escaped. The jeers continued, a background hum of cruelty that pressed down on her like a weight. Then came a pause, sudden, almost reverent. The rancher stepped forward, boots crunching in the dust, shadow stretching across the auction block, his figure tall, silent, protective. The wind stirred, lifting dust and whispers alike. Every eye turned toward him, curiosity mixed with a strange, unspoken unease. He lifted his head, gaze steady, voice low but unwavering. "My son needs you." The words sliced through the crowd's laughter, sharp and deliberate. Murmurs rippled through the spectators, uncertain, shifting, a current of tension weaving through the square. The girl's eyes met his, disbelief flickering into a spark of hope she hadn't felt in weeks. Dust swirled around them, carried on the dry wind, as if the desert itself acknowledged the turning of fate. The hawk above wheeled once, high and silent, a witness to the moment. The auctioneer's hammer remained motionless, the crowd frozen in a mix of shock and curiosity. The jeering men glanced at each other, uncertain how to proceed, their entertainment suspended by a man who seemed to command the desert itself. The girl's chest rose and fell rapidly, relief mingling with fear, as if the air had suddenly thickened, charged with the possibility of escape, of safety. She was no longer just a commodity, no longer merely a spectacle for cruel eyes. The rancher's shadow fell long across the board, brushing against her chained wrists. His presence spoke louder than any plea, protection, defiance, a promise of something more. The wind stung her cheeks, carrying the scent of dust and fire, mixing with the faint, strange scent of hope. Somewhere beyond, a horse whinnied, a small, frightened sound echoing across the square. And in that moment, the girl understood something fundamental. The chains might still cling to her skin, the ropes still bite, but her fate had shifted. The town might have laughed at her suffering, but a new story was being written here, in the dust, in the wind, in the piercing gaze of a lonely man whose grief had brought him to her. She lifted her head slightly, meeting his eyes with the smallest, almost imperceptible flicker of trust. The desert sun continued its relentless glare, yet it no longer felt oppressive. For the first time in weeks, the girl's pulse slowed, her breathing steadied, as if the weight of the crowd's cruelty had lifted, replaced by the gravity of a man's choice and a promise of what might come beyond the horizon. The sun-baked street of Dry Creek shimmered with heat as dust rose in lazy spirals from the boots of the young woman. Her wrists now free but raw and tingling, a lingering reminder of chains recently broken. She stumbled toward the creaking stagecoach, eyes darting, every glance searching for an escape that did not exist, the horizon empty and merciless. The rancher walked beside her, hat low over his eyes, face grim, a silence around him as thick and oppressive as the desert air. His hand, large and steady, rested briefly on her shoulder, not command, not force, but a touch that was both protective and unsettling. The stagecoach groaned under their weight as the horses strained against the sun-scorched earth, hooves pounding a rhythm that echoed across the canyon walls. Dust rose in clouds behind them, curling like ghostly fingers, and the wind cut sharp against their faces, lifting loose strands of her hair. Rattlesnakes slid silently across the parched dust, vanishing into the cracks, their presence unnoticed but constant, a silent warning of the peril in the land they crossed. Hawks circled high overhead, their piercing cries slicing the air like warnings only the wild understood. She spoke little, eyes fixed on him, a gaze that pierced through his stoicism, laden with silent accusation. He did not flinch, did not look away. Instead, he allowed the tension to stretch between them, the space filled with unspoken histories of solitude and suffering. Nights on the wagon were colder than the day had promised, the desert air seeping into their bones. Firelight from the small lantern flickered across their faces, revealing scars, physical and unseen, that each carried like invisible luggage. Her jaw clenched against the wind. He, silent and vigilant, his hands never far from the reins, never far from her presence. The canyon seemed endless, a labyrinth of dust and shadow, but obstacles came regardless. A river, swollen from a recent storm, blocked their path. Horses balked at the rushing water, hooves skidding against slick stones. The rancher dismounted, his voice low but firm as he guided her. "Step careful. I won't let it take you." Moments of vulnerability flared, the girl realizing for the first time that someone bore the weight of her life as fiercely as she bore her own fear. Bandits appeared one dusk, their silhouettes sharp against a blood-red sunset. Dust rose again in chaotic clouds as gunfire echoed across the canyon. She clung to the side of the wagon, heart hammering, as he maneuvered through the ambush. Not a word was spoken, yet their understanding deepened, a tether of trust slowly forming between two fractured souls. Dialogue came sparingly, each line weighted. "You're mine now." "But I won't break you," he said once, voice steady, eyes unflinching. And she felt the first flicker of strange, uncomfortable hope. A storm struck before nightfall, lightning carving the sky into jagged scars, rain hammering the canvas of the wagon, turning the dust to slick mud and the canyon floor into a roaring river. She pressed herself against him as the wagon pitched, their bodies sharing warmth in the cold chaos, breaths mingling in the heavy air. The storm, fierce and unyielding, became a crucible. Each bolt, each roar of thunder, a test of endurance, of trust, of something that might grow between them. Symbolism threaded through every mile. The chains she had worn were gone, replaced by the barbed fencing of the ranch waiting ahead. A cage, perhaps, but one that might yet become sanctuary. Her wrists, once bound in iron, now carried scars like silent badges of survival. His hand, always near but never controlling, was both a shield and a question, asking her to step into a new world she did not yet understand. The canyon whispered around them, a witness to fear, courage, and the beginnings of a bond forged in dust, wind, and survival. By the time the stagecoach rolled to a halt at the edge of the ranch, both bodies stiff with cold and tension, something unspoken had passed between them. She was physically rescued, yes, but emotionally, she remained on trial, measured in silent glances, in the small mercies and unyielding strength of the rancher. The sun dipped behind the distant ridges, painting the landscape in firelight and shadow. The journey was far from over, but the first threads of connection, fragile and trembling, had begun to weave themselves into a tapestry of trust, fear, and something dangerously close to hope. The ranch stretched before her like a vast, breathing entity, both sanctuary and cage. Rough wood walls groaned under the wind, splintered edges biting at her fingertips as she moved cautiously along the corrals. Rope burns still burned on her wrists, a lingering echo of the chains that had bound her. The air smelled of sweat and leather, mixed with the sharp tang of wild sage that grew stubbornly through the dry soil. Every step carried the crunch of dust under her boots, each creak of a gate amplified in the emptiness. It was as if the ranch itself were watching, waiting, judging her. The townsfolk's whispers reached her even here, carried over the hills by the dry wind. Resentment simmered, jealousy and fear coiling like predators behind their eyes. The ranch hands, broad and scarred from years of labor, cast sidelong glances, voices laced with teasing cruelty. She felt their scrutiny pressing down like the desert sun, a reminder that even here, freedom came with trials. Yet beneath that weight, something new flickered within her. A wild mare pawed at the dust, nostrils flaring, eyes full of fire and defiance. Her hands trembled as she reached for the reins, each breath a battle against fear and self-doubt. The mare reared, hooves kicking clouds of dust into her face, yet she held firm, voice low, coaxing the animal with a mixture of patience and steel. Slowly the mare's flanks softened beneath her touch. Triumph surged through her, a feeling raw and exhilarating, a spark of power she hadn't known she possessed. The rancher watched silently, shadowed in the doorway, his eyes betraying admiration and worry in equal measure. Night fell abruptly, storm clouds gathering over the ridges. Lightning cut jagged lines across the sky, illuminating her face as she moved through the barn. A trapped calf cried softly, struggling against the splintered rails. She knelt in the hay, hands working quickly to free it, the smell of damp straw and rain rising sharply around her. Every movement was careful, deliberate. Courage burned inside her, a fierce light against the storm's darkness, and she felt the first rush of independence. "You think I'm weak." "Watch me," she whispered, voice swallowed by the wind, heavy with defiance. Romantic tension lingered in small, unspoken gestures. Their fingers brushed briefly as tools were passed. Shoulders collided in narrow corridors, and each accidental touch left a spark neither could ignore. Stolen glances, quiet moments by the firelight, shared silences amidst the chaos of the ranch. They were drawn to each other, a subtle gravity growing in the space between them. The desert night held them, a witness to unspoken emotions, broken only by the distant howl of coyotes. By dawn, the storm had passed. The ranch glistened with wet dust, the scent of sage sharp and cleansing. She stood in the corral, reins in hand, surveying the land with a newfound confidence. The rancher remained nearby, cautious and watchful, pride flickering in the corners of his eyes, and yet, the shadow of her auctioned past clung to her, a ghost in the corners of the barn, a cold reminder in the sting of rope burns, a whisper in the wind. Strength had grown, yes, but memory lingered, refusing to let go. The ranch's rhythms, slow and steady, were unfamiliar yet comforting, a guide she was only beginning to follow. The young woman's breath rose in clouds in the cool morning air. The mare nudged her gently, a living reminder of her progress. The rancher's eyes met hers briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Trust, tension, and something unspoken, fragile, dangerous. In that uneasy calm, she realized she was carving a place in this land for herself, step by tentative step. The past still haunted her, but she was learning to move forward, to claim strength from the shadows of her fear. And as the sun broke over the ridges, spilling gold across the wet wood and the corral, she knew one thing: she was no longer merely a victim of her chains. Here, amidst the dust, sage, and quiet strength of the ranch, she was beginning to find herself. The fragile calm of the ranch, shattered before dawn, carried on the rhythmic pounding of hooves against the canyon floor. Dust rose in angry clouds, curling like smoke around the corrals, stirred by a figure approaching with purpose. A bounty hunter, lean and cruel, rode into the valley, his eyes calculating, his hand never far from the pistol at his hip. The townsfolk had whispered rumors, carried by the wind, She was worth more dead than alive, and the setting sun now cast long shadows over their lives. Warning of danger inching closer, hawks circled overhead, their cries sharp and hollow, slicing through the tense air. The rancher, normally a wall of quiet stoicism, felt a crack appear in his armor. He stepped from the barn, boots crunching in the loose dust, eyes locked on the hunter, every muscle taut, every thought shadowed by moral uncertainty. Lines blurred between justice and survival as the hunter dismounted, dust settling in ghostly clouds around him. Their confrontation was silent at first, only the wind carrying tension like a drumbeat. Then a voice, low, deliberate. "You shouldn't have come here." The young woman, heart hammering, felt fear ignite into something fiercer. She grabbed a nearby lantern, her fingers brushing the polished wood of the rifle leaning against the wall. Together they moved in concert, her body tense but steady, as the ranch became a fortress under siege. Dust and sweat mingled with the metallic tang of gunfire, each shot echoing through the canyon like the toll of a bell. She dodged and ducked, pulling him behind barrels, guiding him past obstacles, her courage now as visible as the bruises on her wrists had once been hidden. Romantic tension flared in fleeting gestures. Fingers brushed as they both aimed, a brief spark of contact in the chaos. Sparks of firelight reflected in their eyes, mingling with the scent of hay and gunpowder. A fleeting glance, a brush of shoulders, a shared breath. Their connection deepened in the crucible of danger, unspoken yet undeniable. Each moment carried the weight of possibility, of vulnerability, of a desire neither dared to name aloud. Chains, once physical, were gone, but emotional shackles lingered. She hesitated before each step, carrying the weight of past captivity and the precarious trust that now bound her to the rancher. Yet every motion, every calculated dive, every careful aim proved her resilience. The bounty hunter's smirk faltered, uncertainty creeping across his face as he realized she was no longer a frightened girl. Then came betrayal. An ally of the rancher, a man whose loyalty had seemed unshakable, whispered the ranch's location to the hunter, a trail of dust and deceit leading them to the heart of the valley. The rancher's jaw tightened, eyes dark with disbelief and fury, the moral line between friend and foe now blurred beyond recognition. The young woman's grip on the rifle stiffened. Her pulse raced not only with fear but with an understanding of the stakes. Love and survival were intertwined here, each moment a test of endurance, trust, and courage. The sun dipped low, painting the canyon in firelight and shadow. As the hunter advanced, a cruel smile carving lines across his face. Wind whipped dust across the plains, carrying with it the cries of horses and the subtle, ominous warning of the hawks overhead. Every heartbeat became a drum of suspense, every shadow a threat. The ranch, once a sanctuary, now felt like a stage set for a final reckoning. The echoes of betrayal resounding in each wooden beam, in every footfall across the dry earth. In the quiet moments between chaos, their eyes met, sharing a wordless promise. They would endure, together no matter the cost, and yet, as the hunter drew nearer, the young woman knew that courage alone would not suffice. Love demanded sacrifice, trust demanded risk, and the fragile bonds they had begun to forge would be tested in ways neither could anticipate. The chapter closed with the ranch silhouetted against the dying sun, dust swirling like smoke, the hawks circling above, and the shadow of betrayal stretching across the valley, a harbinger of the confrontation yet to come. The stage was set, the pieces in motion, fear, hope, and desire coiled together in the desert air, ready to ignite. The sky darkened like a storm-forged curtain, clouds roiling over the canyon ridges as if the heavens themselves were preparing for battle. Wind tore across the plains, bending sagebrush and rattling the corrals, carrying the electric tang of ozone. Rain began in fits, sharp and cold, hammering the dust into mud, turning the dry earth beneath the ranch into a slick, treacherous battlefield. Thunder shattered the silence in jagged cracks, a deafening drum that made hearts pound and nerves snap. Lightning carved the sky into blinding scars, revealing faces etched with fear, determination, and the raw edges of desperation. Horses bolted, nostrils flaring, hooves slipping in the mud. their panicked cries mingling with the relentless drum of rain. Fences snapped under the strain of thrashing animals, sending splinters flying into the air like shrapnel. Gunfire rang across the soaked fields, the sharp, metallic staccato echoing from canyon wall to canyon wall. The rancher and the young woman moved side by side, each motion instinctive, every step cementing a bond forged in adrenaline and necessity. Mud caked their boots, and hands slid across slippery rails as they ducked and fired, breaths ragged, pulse hammering with the rhythm of survival. A near-death moment struck as a falling beam pinned the young woman against the ground. Rain mixing with dust in a gritty paste across her cheeks. The rancher's hands tore through the timber, lifting her free with a grunt, his eyes locking with hers. "I should have saved you sooner," she whispered, voice trembling with the weight of fear and something more intimate, something that flickered like fire against the storm-darkened night. For a moment, silence reigned, broken only by the hiss of rain and the distant cry of a hawk riding the winds above. Their connection deepened, unspoken, yet undeniable, as they navigated the chaos together. Faces slick with mud, eyes reflecting the sporadic lightning, breaths heavy and ragged, they became a single unit against the torrent. The smell of wet dust, sweat, and blood mingled in the storm-laden air, sharp and intoxicating, marking every moment with tangible urgency. Every gesture, every glance, every shared nod of understanding threaded them closer. A fragile intimacy born of survival, the bounty hunter, emboldened and reckless, struck at the weakest points. But the tide of the storm and the rancher's strategic command turned the land into a trap. Streams swollen with rain carved natural barriers, corrals funneled movements, and animals, wild with fear, yet strangely guided by instinct, became allies in the chaos. Loyalty was tested, and every minor character's choices became critical. Some faltered, some stood firm. Each act a measure of courage under the storm's relentless pressure. Lightning illuminated the hunter's sneer, momentarily blinding him to the traps surrounding him. He was finally cornered, pushed back by both human strategy and nature's fury. The young woman, soaked through, rifle steady despite shaking hands, held her ground beside the rancher. The mud streaked across her face, a testament to courage. Chains long broken no longer bound her wrists, but emotional shackles, fear, doubt, past trauma, still clung, loosening only slightly in the crucible of battle. The storm began to relent as dawn approached, pale light filtering through ragged clouds, painting the canyon in muted gold and gray. The chaos faded, leaving behind the smell of wet earth and smoke, the sharp tang of blood, and the residue of adrenaline and fear. The rancher and the young woman stood amid the wreckage, chest heaving, eyes scanning the horizon. Scarred hands gripped reins and rifles alike, hearts still pounding, yet a fragile peace settled over them. They had endured the storm, both physical and emotional. Though the bounty hunter was defeated and the ranch's integrity maintained, the landscape and their souls bore the marks of battle. Mud-caked faces, torn fences, and bruised bodies were visible scars. Fear, trust, and burgeoning love were invisible, yet just as enduring. The canyon seemed to exhale, wind whispering through the trees and sage, carrying away the storm but leaving the memory of its fury behind. The ridge rose above the ranch like a silent witness, wind tousling hair and clothing, carrying the scent of fire and sun-baked dust. The desert stretched endlessly below, glowing gold and crimson as the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the corrals, fences, and grazing horses. The rancher and the young woman stood side by side, shoulders brushing, eyes scanning the vast expanse of the land that had become both battlefield and sanctuary. Each ridge and canyon below bore the scars of recent chaos, yet the settling dust made the world seem calm, forgiving, and full of possibility. The townsfolk approached slowly, cautious but curious, boots crunching in the settling dust. Whispers ran through the crowd, a mix of grudging respect and astonishment. The bounty hunter was gone, driven off or defeated, his threat extinguished like smoke in the wind. Faces that had once sneered now regarded the pair with a new understanding, nods of acknowledgement, and murmured apologies carried on the late afternoon breeze. The young woman's shoulders relaxed slightly. Her chest rose in steady breaths, the weight of fear and chains long gone. Above, a hawk soared high, wings spread wide, riding the currents of wind with effortless grace. Its sharp cry echoed through the canyon, a symbol of freedom reclaimed. Down below, a river ran unobstructed, silver threads reflecting the sunset, cutting through the land with steady persistence. Every element spoke of renewal, the dust settling on old wounds, the river washing away remnants of struggle, the hawk leaving the cage of earth for open skies. Their fingers brushed, lingering in a touch that had once been forbidden, tentative, electrified by unspoken longing. Dialogue was minimal, heavy with meaning. We survived. Now we live, the rancher murmured, his voice carrying over the still air, resonating with the gravity of shared trials. She met his gaze, eyes reflecting the last light of the sun, and nodded, understanding the depth of what had been endured and what had been won. The young woman, no longer a victim of circumstance, stood tall. Her strength was visible in the ease with which she carried herself, in the calm clarity of her gaze. Her laughter, soft and melodic, mingled with the rustle of sage in the wind, a quiet celebration of survival, resilience, and newfound purpose. The rancher, once defined by solitude and loss, now found family in her presence, in the land, and in the community slowly circling toward acceptance. Horses grazed in the fading light, their soft noises blending with the rustling wind. The smell of fire from distant cooking pits, and the warm dust settling over the land like a blanket. The ranch felt alive, whole, healed in its own way. Shadows lengthened across the corral, and the last traces of the storm and betrayal faded into memory, replaced by the quiet hum of life restored. Symbolism threaded through every detail. The hawk's freedom above, the river's unobstructed path, the dust settling after chaos. Each image spoke of endings and beginnings, of battles survived and promises kept. The bond between the rancher and the young woman, forged in fear, fire, and desperation, now anchored in trust, love, and shared experience, glowed quietly against the backdrop of desert sunset. As the sun kissed the horizon, painting the sky in molten gold and deep crimson, they turned toward the land they had fought to protect. Their silhouettes, side by side atop the ridge, projected strength and unity. The past lingered only as memory, no longer as chains or shadows. In that moment, the desert held them in peace. The wind whispered of legacy, and the audience felt the story's closure. Triumph, survival, love, and the quiet promise of tomorrow.